this panel is taking a bit of a different angle to the discussions that you had in the day before and this morning, but at the same time it was quite striking, and it was in one of the working groups also this morning, how much again the call to governments and action by government and stable policy environments and leadership from government is called for. We see a lot happening at national level. Sometimes we may argue it's not enough, and of course we see some of the negotiations being, especially the climate change negotiations currently also being very challenging. Cities have been mentioned very often, and they are indeed where a lot of action happens. But the level of government is very often overlooked. It's the level in between, the subnational government level. And this is what this panel is about. Those governments have very different from one country to another, but very important tools, competences in many sectors for managing environment, transport, land use, planning, and very often also even legislative powers there. And so they can really make a difference, and they can inspire sometimes also their national governments, and not only on what they specifically do on their policies, which are important for business and their investments in a stable policy environment, but also to work with their business and how they create innovative public-private partnerships. So that is what the panel in its first introductions will mention and work through. We have a discussion afterwards among the panelists on what can be done even more, or on their experiences. So let me now introduce the distinguished panel here. We have the Minister Mabuyakhulu from Kwazulu-Natal, Minister for Economic Development and Tourism. Kwazulu-Natal has just joined the Climate Group's States and Regions Alliance, that is an ever-growing group of subnational governments that is pushing this, what we call a clear revolution, so to have some real transformative action, not to wait until 2050, but really act now to get that green economy up and running. We have Christos Sirros. He's the General Delegate for Québec in Brussels. He represents the Premier, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today. Québec has been a leader on climate change and on sustainable development for years. Premier Charest is also co-chairing the States and Regions Alliance of the Climate Group. He's actually one of our ambassadors for the good cause and for the action of states and regions and their recognition in the international environment. And then we have the Permanent Secretary for Environment and Energy in Baden-Wuerttemberg, Helmfried Meinel. And that's the third state in Germany that joined the Climate Group. And there's good prospects that German group within the States and Regions Alliance is growing. So with that introduction, I give the floor first to Christos Sirros from Quebec to have some introductory remarks on what we're trying to answer here.
Thank you very much, Luke. On behalf of the Premier, who unfortunately, as Luke said, couldn't be here, I want to thank the organizers, first of all, for this invitation. It's an opportunity for us to put forward a little bit of our vision about climate change, green technology, and why we've been playing such an active role in the States and Regions Alliance and with the Climate Group on these issues. I found it interesting that we just heard from the upcoming presidency of COP18, which is 20 years after Rio. Rio plus 20 is happening in a little while. And if you go back to Rio 20 years ago, it's what gave the impetus for a lot of what's going on in terms of green business, industry, technology, this whole notion of the need to meet the climate change challenge. And that's really what's been driving Quebec and everybody else to put forward our initiatives and our ideas about doing this. I suppose it would be better if we were talking about what we've achieved instead of talking about what we still need to do, but we have to keep plugging at it, and that's why it's important. Just to situate you a little bit on Quebec, I don't know how many of you know it, but Quebec is the largest province geographically within Canada. It's the second largest province population-wise within Canada. It's the only French-speaking society in North America, and a sea of English-speaking population. And Canada being a federation, and Luc mentioned this a little bit in a sense, we have specific jurisdictions and responsibilities as a government responsible to its electorate and its people that are our jurisdictions. And we've taken the attitude in Quebec that if it's our jurisdiction at home, it's our jurisdiction everywhere and abroad. And that's really what has been driving Quebec's presence on the international scene around an issue that for Quebecers, as for everybody else, is of crucial importance, climate change, and the need to do something about it. We've been looking at some of the figures, and if you look at the United Nations Developmental Program, the UNDP, they estimate that something between 50 to 80% of all the actions that need to be undertaken to meet the climate change challenge need to be done or can be done best at the local or subnational government level. And that's clearly where a lot of the leadership on this question has been coming from ever since, I would say, around 2005, when in Montreal at the then COP, whatever it was, there was a leaders summit at the level of states and regions to promote the idea that although national leaders may decide things at the national level, a lot of the implementation has to be done at the local, regional, and state level. And that needs to be recognized by the players at the national level. And in fact, since then, a lot of progress has been made with initiatives such as groups such as the Climate Group and the States and Regions Alliance to get that recognized in the Cancun Agreement, for instance. That being the general sort of politics of the issue, you then need to come down to what specifically can be done at each level. And being here on behalf of the Premier in Quebec, I think I can at least put forward in the few minutes that I have 3 specific areas that we've acted on that give an impetus to the emergence of a green economy, of a green value system within the society as such. One is the decision to adopt a policy on sustainable development that is directly directed at all government institutions, public and parapublic, which lists the principles that should be followed as an example by which to lead the rest of the society. So all the ministries, all the universities, all the various public and parapublic sector have to abide, in a sense, by a certain number of principles that have been laid out in the law that was adopted in the National Assembly. We've also adopted a strategy for creating the emergence of a clean tech industry, which has 5 specific areas that need to be addressed, and we can perhaps get into them a little bit later. And a specific plan of action with targets such as ensuring that Quebec becomes a developer of the electric vehicle, and whereby in 2020 we target 25% of all new vehicles to be bought in Quebec to be electric vehicles, and by 2030 to have at least 95% of all public transportation having recourse to electricity for moving people. So a target on a specific sector that we want to develop further, a general policy to orient and guide how ministries and parapublic sectors should operate within the notion of sustainable development, and a specific strategy to ensure that we have a cluster that becomes very, very performing around the green tech industry. I'll leave it there for now, and perhaps we can get into it a little bit later.
Yes, well, there are thousands of good examples at that level of government, and so we do have a bit of little time, but I'm sure we can come back to that. Christos speaks from experience as a former minister also in the Quebec government, so he's been very close to the policy making and also to help on that leadership in Quebec. I'd like to hear from Helmfried on what Baden-Wuerttemberg has been doing at large at its higher policy level, but also how you've been involved in your businesses.
Okay, thank you, Luke. Ladies and gentlemen, energy and climate change policy is one of the priority fields to which the new state government of Baden-Wuerttemberg intends to give special emphasis. Everything we do in this area takes place under the major heading of sustainability. The state government's aim is to make sustainability a key decision criterion of administrative and government action. Another important issue is the active participation of business, of civil society and local authorities. It is important for us to define clear, and coherent goals for Baden-Württemberg with clear targets. For instance, we want to reduce carbon dioxide emissions by 25% by 2020 and by even 90% by 2050 compared to 1990, and generate 38% of electricity from renewable energy sources by 2020. Thereof 10% generated by wind energy and 10 to 12% generated by photovoltaics. And that figure is rising up to altogether at least 80% of renewables by 2050. To put climate policy on a statutory footing, we will incorporate binding targets in a climate change bill for Baden-Württemberg by the end of the year. Economic common sense dictates that we have to break the link between economic growth and energy consumption. Baden-Württemberg is one of the most energy efficient regions, nationally and internationally. But there are still huge potentials in energy efficiency to open up, and therefore we want to become even more resource and energy efficient in the future. There are real economic benefits in being a pioneer and a driving force for change. Just to give a few examples, from energy advisory services to the installation and maintenance of solar systems and other means of harnessing renewable energy, right through to complete building renovation, local business benefit from this kind of demand. These local businesses are the small and medium-sized enterprises which form the backbone of our economy. The energy transition will obviously entail a great deal of work, but it will also create jobs in the process. The best thing policymakers can do is to provide a reliable framework which supports the green economy, and that is precisely what we're working on right now. I'm convinced that the energy transition will not only provide to be a success for our climate, but also for the small and medium-sized businesses and entrepreneurs, and finally for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Indeed, inspiring, and what I specifically pick up is that you are ambitious and you're already exploring how to become more ambitious just because you understand the first mover knowledge. So that is, to us at the climate, definitely a signal of leadership. Then from North America over Europe to leadership in South Africa, from the Minister Mabuyakhulu, who has a long political career, so he has a lot of experience with political leadership. And what we've learned from Kwazulu-Natal, it's really impressive, and so I'm really anxious to hear more from the Minister.
Well, thank you very much, and to my fellow panelists and to distinguished guests and everybody else. Well, I just want to say that I think we've heard from our colleagues. I would say that as my opening remarks, I think there are four critical areas for us that we should look at when we look at the role of states and regions. I'm going to put those broadly, and then later I can come back and address what probably we are doing in Kwazulu-Natal. But I just want to start by saying that states and regions that are located in the developing world and those who are in the developed world, they start from an uneven slate. In the sense that in the developing world, we are dealing with huge number of challenges, that therefore when you are actually coming up with strategies for sustainable growth, they must take into account the fact that all what we want to do in the global system is a point where we can be able to see the leveling of the playing field. But having said that, one of the issues for us that we think certain regions must play a very important role in it is in the area of policy making. We play a role in the policy making for our own states and for our own regions, but we also influence national states in terms of the policy that they should be shaping for the green economy and the green growth, and where we should include shaping and influencing national states in terms of their green growth strategies. So it's important at that level. The question is, how do we utilize both at the level of states to implement policy that we may have come up with, but also to actually influence the better policy outcomes at national state level, but also at multilateral institutions. The second area where I think is the biggest role for states and regions, which we should be playing, we have a regulatory authority, and therefore in that regard, we are also responsible for designing and coming up with the regulatory frameworks, with themselves must actually taking the issue of the green growth and sustainable growth and climate change issue quite very seriously. In those regulatory frameworks, at least we must deal with three critical issues. The first one is, of course, to regulate, and that in the regulation there is balance. That you don't simply overemphasize one element and negate the other element. It's going to be important with regard to dealing with the question of your natural capital and how do you preserve and protect those, and how do you deal with the issues around, for instance, your resource stewardships. These are part of issues that when you are therefore regulating, to what extent are you bringing in balance? The second element with regard to those issue of regulation is the issue of the capacity to monitor. It's one, to have policy. It's another, to have a regulatory framework that is in place. But the question is, do you have capacity to implement? Which therefore becomes, the issue of monitoring becomes absolutely vital. The third element that is linked to that is an ability to act decisively. Because it's of no use to have a regulatory framework, regulatory laws in the country, and therefore you do not have capacity to act so that you can be able to punish and therefore bring it to bear to those who may actually be acting out of it, particularly with regard to externalities. Then the third issue and my last issue with regard to what I think broadly is an area for states and regions, is in the area of them contributing in setting up targets, which themselves are targets which are realistic, but over and above that, ensuring that we are also focusing in having complementary strategies that are actually dealing with some of these areas I'm talking about. The areas of subsidies, to what extent in which states and regions are able to have the pricing structure that is competitive, the pricing structure that does not disadvantage certain parts of the world and advantage other parts of the world. The question of how do you therefore move towards uniform global standards, I think is important. One of the reasons that has driven us in Kwazulu-Natal to join into this alliance is precisely because we have got views that we think we can contribute into the dialogue and the debate, and therefore shape those kinds of outcomes. But when we go forward, we will come back and discuss what we do as goals. But I thought, as an opening remark, let's rather focus on the broad strategic thrust that can cover all of us, where we think the role of states and regions can be.
Thank you very much, Minister. And again, very inspiring. What I pick up is the issue of capacity. It's also breaking a bit of a matter where a lot of the exchange is a one-way. That's, if you have to say, north-south. Whereas this is clear, everything that's happening, also for example, Kwazulu-Natal is feeding into the discussion in the whole knowledge sharing platform that this alliance consists of. That said, and this is not a very known program, and in fact the UNDP, which actually also estimated the fact that, and the importance of that level of government, also has a program that's called the Territorial Approach on Climate Change, where the member, at least our leader, encourage our members to join up in a bilateral capacity building exercise, which is again different. It's not just one way from the industrialized countries to the developing countries, but a real exchange, and encouraged by the UNDP under the patronage of UNDP. But it's a program that not has been widely communicated, so that's why I'm saying here again. And then the issue of monitoring, yes, domestically of course, but one other issue that came up at some of the events in Durban was the comparability of that monitoring and comparability of the policies that are being put in place at the state and regional level. Of course, the nations are reporting there's a reasonably good MRV system in place. The cities have actually launched into this as well a few years ago. There's many projects where they have these joint reporting platforms, and one of the new projects of the alliance that is to be announced soon, we hope. There's still a few wishes to be cleared, but we are actually working into the direction of a joint reporting platform, so we can actually compare what's happening at that level of government, which also is important for business to know where and in what to invest and to see the investment opportunities. So now I open up with quite a general question, but I think it is one that is worth having your views on. Because the green economy has so many definitions, and I don't think there will ever be a closed definition to it. But it would be good to hear from your government and from your position what you understand on this green economy. How do you see it, and how do you see, again, your role in try to develop this further, depending again on the view, how you feel. And I need to open to you with that.
Well, I can start off. I mentioned in my introductory remarks the notion of an ecotech cluster in Quebec. We've created one, and the definition we use to sort of identify what makes up the green economy basically is anyone that uses, produces, promotes, sponsors, funds, technology that offers users superior performance at a lower cost, that improves the quality of life by optimizing resources, and significantly reduces negative impacts on the environment. We've used that definition to bring together over 400 businesses or partners or actors in that area in order to sort of focus the efforts of everybody involved in that sector to optimize effectively the innovation, the research, the exchange of information, the networking, so that we can identify the targets we want to achieve as a society. So that's the definition we've been working with, and the instrument we've created to sort of mobilize the actors in the area on a collaborative manner, government and private enterprise, funded both by government and private enterprise, is the ecotech cluster, which has been playing that role, and I'm sure you have similar kinds of activities in your areas.
Clusters are indeed a very valuable tool to let things grow to have been growing. Energy transition is one of the main focus in Germany as a whole, and in Baden-Wuerttemberg at a special point, since we had to shut down 2 nuclear power plants last year, which created 50% or nearly 50% of the electricity in Baden-Wuerttemberg. Now we have only 25% from nuclear power plants, which are running for a few further years, and so we have to go get along with the fact that nuclear power capacities are going down, going off the market, and renewables have to go into the market, but that demands the reconstruction of a smart grid, that demands demands that management, of course, and that demands backup power plants, gas power plants probably, and we have to build up a new market design, since we have already about 20% of electricity in Germany from renewables, and we see now the economic effects of that rather high degree of electricity, which costs no money as soon as the power plant has been financed. That is very new to the economy, and we have to go along with that. So that is the new field we have to develop. And that looks very different when we come up to 30 or 40 or 50% of electricity from renewables. And we have to work on this. The same is true to storage capacities, which cannot only be hydro storage capacities, but we have to talk about hydrogen economy, about power to gas, about heat storages, long-term storages. Well, these are challenges in the technology side. On the other side, we know that environmental industry is one of the major global fields, and that is where we can push forward our industry, and that is what we need, since we have really no resources. So we have to work on environmental technology as a new technology field, to be a pioneer in that field as well. And so we have to work on waste management, for example. Urban mining as a new field to get along with, rare earths. This is a real topic for us, because we have no rare earth sources in Germany and in Europe. So we have to reinvent mining from the waste resources we have already. So that is another big issue. Then water purification is a big issue, wastewater treatment, as well as another impact of climate change already taking place, flood protection. And so there are many fields on which to work.
But I think I want to say that, adding to what my colleagues have just indicated, in our view, in simple terms, we see the green economy as an alternative industrial development that promotes equilibrium between industrial resource utilization and environmental protection to ensure the socio-economic growth. Now, in doing that, it therefore becomes important that at the center of this, we also take into cognizance the issues that are affecting the environment. In other words, the need for us to be able to ensure that there is sustainable development and sustainable growth, that we protect our environment, but also that we bring the issue of our people, particularly those marginalized people. From when we come from the developing world, we're dealing with a number of people who are termed for the purpose of the discussion environmental groups. Whether we talk about rural communities or talk about women who are hiking a living, and therefore we are heavily reliant on sustainable and subsistence agriculture. You want to ensure that all of us are able to protect their water streams and their rivers, and we are able also to ensure that they have access to energy. And therefore, that when they are relying on the natural assets, the natural capital, that they actually utilize that in a manner that does not seem to destroy it, but can preserve the future generation. In doing all this, we can only do that if you have a very clear growth strategy that is a green growth strategy. It is for this reason that we are seeing more and more states and seeing more and more of regions and national states that are now actually developing green growth strategies. And I think you may have heard of Senator King yesterday speaking about what Rwanda is doing, what Ethiopia is doing, and what we are doing in South Africa. And many other states are doing that. And in global, we almost now have more than 89 countries that are now developed particular clear strategies around the green energy, in particular renewable energy. And we've also have 73 other countries that are going into other areas. So all of this, what it says to us, we as a world, for the preservation of this world for our future, we have to change the mode of production and the manner in which we have approached industrialization. We can no longer have rely on fossil fuels and hope that it will actually continue to happen at the manner it is today. But coming from a developing country as well, in the intervening period, we are dealing with huge challenges that must be realistic. And therefore it means we are going to have to exploit that. But when we exploit that, the question is, how are we able to use the new latest technology that is able to ensure that it reduces the contribution to gas emissions? Those are going to be fundamental questions that faces all of us as government, but also therefore seek to ensure that with all stakeholders, they also participate in shaping that debate, because this is our collective future, not the future of those in government. It's our collective future.
Thanks. What I take from this especially is when we were attempting to describe this green economy, some call it green growth as well at the same time. And that is another opportunity for debate, which is the better known for it. But the inclusiveness of that green economy, not being an economy next to the current economy. So actually, some may argue that a new economy is a better description than a green economy, and especially the social inclusiveness of this whole paradigm. Maybe going back for the last minutes that we have left on the public-private partnership and what is happening in your state or in your region, and maybe that's also an opportunity to raise, because very often the call comes from civil society and from business on what the government should do, but maybe this could also be an opportunity to express what you might expect from business. Because leadership has to come from all actors. It's coming clearly from your government as we see it, but then maybe some ideas that you have for business as well.
I can simply say that in Kwazulu-Natal, what we've done, we've actually set up a work group, and we are currently finalizing our own provincial strategy with regard to the green economy. But I think we've already begun to simply say, as part of our process preparing for the last year's COP17 in Durban, which we hosted, we then have actually worked out our own targets, and we've set up a special work group and a council that is now discussing issues of climate change at a state level. And we're actually using that council as an interface between the various role players in the province, even at national level. So that when we're actually heading to Rio +20, we actually have a delegation that begins to talk to these issues, but also we can influence not only our nation states in South Africa, but also talk to influencing the discussion that takes place inside as a region, but as well as in the organ of African ministers, that is in the AU that is dealing with issues of climate change. And we have seen this cohesion, particularly coming from the African continent. That cohesion has been largely based that we have actually got avenues in which we have been able to invite private sector to come into it, because some of the issues that we are dealing with ultimately must lead to binding agreements at global level. And we need therefore to have binding agreements on a number of issues. Those binding agreements must be issues around standards, which is important that if you actually are talking about the exploitation of natural capital and natural resources, and therefore you can use mining as an example, or any other, you would be expecting that an investor's contract is similar whether that investor is in Canada, whether that investor is in the Baden-Wuerttemberg in Germany, whether the investor is in Cambodia or in any part of Africa. And therefore we would want to see consistency in those areas. But the second part is that for us, it is important that we must bring in this concept of monetization around the question of natural resources. And therefore be able to simply say, as we utilize them, we also must guard against the question of overutilization of resources. And there must come a time when we say, in this particular instance, it is in the best interest of society and of our future generation that we make policy positions that are not only expedient, but policy positions that are sustainable. And therefore, it is that kind of a debate when I started by saying, we are responsible for policy making, but as responsible, but policy is collectively shared by all actors in order to exclusively preserve of state or government environment. But the ultimate policy, we must therefore be able to have the guts to implement it.
The green economy cannot be a goal which is just poured out from top down, from down to the bottom. It has only also to grow up from the bottom to the top. So it is important to have the debate on the local level, local authorities, with local citizenship groups, with churches, and local companies as well. So everywhere there. And in fact, the energy transition started in Germany by such small grassroots organizations, by developments on the local level. Most of the renewable power plants are owned by private people, not by the big energy companies. That's now just turning since the relevance of renewable power plants is so big, it's grown so much. Another example is fair trade. Fair trade has not been rolled out by the big food trade companies, but by local initiatives, by churches, by civil society on the local level. So that's one point. The other point is that, of course, you need some aggregation on a regional level, on the state level, and then on the federal level. What is more necessary is to link these discussions to each other and to have an instrument to coordinate it in a better way, which is now today the topic of our Chancellor, the Prime Ministers of the states, because that is a real deficiency in the past and hope it will get better. But it is important to convince the public, the citizens of the transition which is necessary. And if you fail with that, you will have at least the experience of our country, some efficient struggle against these developments that stops this development which is very necessary for us.
You know, we talked early on about a framework of what governments can do and what people do and what private business does. And I think ultimately it comes down to government setting the framework for the kind of action it wants to see taken, because they interpret what the people want, and they have a responsibility to deliver. That comes in putting forward things such as strategies that orient action, that allow all the actors to give their input in from the bottom up, but also from the top down. And each, I think it's fair to say that each society also uses its own comparative advantages. You mentioned energy before, and you shut down nuclear plants. Well, we have a state monopoly in energy, and we have that state monopoly because many years ago there was a vision that said that Québec should develop its energy primarily from hydroelectricity. We have 97% of our energy that comes from renewable hydroelectric energy. So that dictates also the kinds of activities that we can promote, and that's a clear example of why we focused on the electric vehicle as where we can do our share in terms of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. And just by the way, Québec within Canada, to be noted, has maintained the kinds of targets that Kyoto set, 2020, same as the European Union, and we're on track to achieve those, even though, well, I won't say anything about our federal government. But that's also why we're playing an important role in trying to exercise the kind of leadership we believe states and regions with legislative powers in particular can exercise on their own national governments and on the international community. And I think the climate group has been playing an important role in that. And we're glad to see that there are new members that are coming in to push it all forward.
Thank you very much, Christos. I was just told that we are actually about to conclude this session. I would actually have loved to know how many questions there are, but you won't be able to ask them because of the limited time. So, who would have asked the question? And maybe they are always still a few minutes, I don't know. Yeah? No? We have to really close? Well, at least a few. And I'm sure the colleagues here, and if you want myself, we can try and answer those. I'll try to wrap up here now. From what we've heard, it's clear there is already a high ambition level, and there is a constant search for even more. Of course, there is this comparability among these regions with their potential and their opportunities that they have. I'll just pick one example to illustrate that a target, an absolute target, is not only reflecting ambition, but it's also what's behind it. If you look at the example of Québec with the 2020 target of 20%, it's actually quite challenging because they don't have the potential to do that with installing more renewables. That's clear. So it all has to come from transport, from industry and housing. And then the 20% gets really challenging, especially in the environment that you're in North America. So that's one on ambition. The other one that was heard is clear, and I think state level has also an important role to coach this, but it has to be supported by all of society, but also cross-party. And even more so, that has to then also be shown by the leadership in government. So it's really beyond, and especially with the members that we work at that level of government, it's really beyond the Minister of Environment. It's the Premier that's behind this, clearly. In Baden-Wuerttemberg, I think we can have no doubt that that is the fact, because it's the first Premier-Minister President ever, as far as we are informed. He's clearly supporting it, and all over the Premier in Québec and the Premier in Kwazulu-Natal was also clearly outspoken at the events in Durban, where he was joining us. And joining this group is also a clear commitment to do so. So this group will also commit in Rio to some targets on different elements of what we call the clean revolution, where we hope that we can really push this transformative action and showcase it by our state and regional government members. I think we also heard from the systems that the states are putting in place to get this dialogue running well with their eco-clusters and with business as a whole. The question I answered about what would you ask from business, okay, I won't be able to answer it, I can have a suggestion, is that I think, and this was something that was said this morning, it should be a clear call from the large business community that is actually behind this. It should be much more clear to the governments that they're being pushed by business to go be even more ambitious than they are, in your case, already are, or where they are laggards, that they go forward. I think there has to be much more coordination among business to come up with that voice. If you would do a count of let me be careful on here, we know of some business that is not as pushing their governments as much as we would like, but if you look at the numbers, actually quite a small part of business. So there could be a much bigger movement still in business to government forward. Not only national, not only at the international level, but also at the state level. So that will be a message for me, also for the business community here. There's much more to say about the subject. I hope you like it, and I'm sure the excellences here would be happy to